Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dissecting Dance, Kicking It with Ren podcast, the podcast that opens up discussions about topics in dance. The goal of this podcast is to allow dancers and non-dancers alike to think about dance from new perspectives, as well as leaving room for discussion. Enjoy the show! Hello, everybody! Welcome to Dissecting Dance, Kicking It with Ren podcast. In case you didn't know, my name is Ren, and I am very much the host on this podcast, so yay for that. So if you couldn't hear, or based on what you can't hear, it is just me today. So you only get me on this episode of the podcast. So this will be fun, this will be interesting. So for these topics, the reason why I didn't bring any of my friends or a special guest on is strictly because I feel like my opinions on things are, specifically this topic, are a bit more controversial. Today's topic is gonna focus on overall class environment, and we're specifically going to delve into, well-being during class, favoritism, jealousy, bias, overall treatment of teachers and students. I know we kind of went into that with other people on the podcast. I've had a lot of former teachers that mean a lot to me, on my podcast, but I didn't want them to delve into favoritism with me, only because they didn't do it, but I think it's just weird to talk about favoritism with former teachers, and I don't want to have friends on either, because I know they would get it, but I also don't want to, I don't want this to affect them. Whatever I say, I don't want them to identify fully, with what I'm saying. So, yeah. As I previously mentioned, so for favoritism in particular, I know that it can be loosely defined. There are some students who, say that teachers play favorites, even though the teachers don't think that they're playing favorites, and they think it looks a different way, or the teacher is actually playing favorites, and the student is like, what are you talking about? You're not playing favorites. So, when I tried to define favoritism, I'm going to try and define it in a way that, is very objective, and very much, obviously favoritism. So I did write down some definitions directly from Google, and so we're just going to kind of tear them up a little bit. So I have favoritism and bias on here. So favoritism is the practice of giving unfair preferential treatment to one person or group at the expense of another. Bias is prejudice in the favor or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. And then another definition that I put in bold is a tendency to believe that some people, ideas, etc. are better than others that usually results in treating people unfairly. I don't know why I wrote that down. Yeah, and then I also wrote the unconscious of leaning towards a specific group of people based on, but not limited to, race, sexuality, and personality. So favoritism and bias, what really takes you down to the root of the issue is establishing your biases. And I'm going to be honest here, I think that every teacher, everyone who wants to teach dance, needs a lesson on, bias and knowing what positive bias is and negative bias is. So positive bias is kind of similar to favoritism, and negative bias is overall just not treating people it's the exact opposite of favoritism. You're basically singling people out unconsciously or consciously or whatever. Bias is mainly unconscious, which is why people need to learn what their biases are and be able to correct them. So the huge difference between... So favoritism is kind of obvious, right? The point of favoritism is that you are unfairly, and listen to the words unfair. You are unfairly putting one person or group above other people. So in dance, that can look like a few things. Like, my standards are pretty low at this point when it comes to favoritism, even though it is my biggest pet peeve. So my first standard is that if it's very obvious that someone is getting special treatment. So, for example, if there is a dancer who is getting more opportunities than everyone else for seemingly no reason. Even if there is a reason, I'm not specifically talking about, because they're really good or whatever. It could be that. Favoritism is not black and white at all. But, but listen to the word unfair. Another example of that is you have a company who is associated with a program of any kind. And a lot of places are like that. And they allow students the opportunity to be able to perform with that company. The place where things get a little wishy-washy, or the place where I'm like, yeah, that's definitely favoritism, is having the same people perform in the show over and over and over again for seemingly no reason. So that's a huge indicator to me. That is some blatant favoritism, especially if there are other people involved who are just as good, maybe even better than some of the people who are, performing. And like I mentioned, that can be based on many different factors, and it often has nothing to do with you. But that's one of the examples of when I see favoritism. In class, for example, a way that I observe favoritism is if one student is consistently being praised or is getting more attention than everybody else in the classroom. That's another big one for me. That specifically happened a lot, where one teacher would use the same couple of people over and over again for things like, demonstrating for everybody. That doesn't really count, but, consistently giving them a crap ton of corrections and giving them a crap ton of praises and being dismissive towards other students in the room, which, believe me, I've been one of those students who's been dismissed, and it's not fun at all. So that is another indicator for me that there is favoritism going on, because with that example in class, the teacher is only paying attention to that one student, so therefore it's favoritism. Now, that would only be considered favoritism if other people are not benefiting from it, and in that specific situation I'm referencing, I definitely was not benefiting. I needed those corrections. But also, it also comes down to, is your teacher willing to give you corrections? That's another factor to consider, because it's definitely favoritism if your teacher is only willing to meet up with a few people for correctional purposes and is very pushbacky when they're trying to meet up with you. So that's another indicator for me that something is going on that is really bad. And I do want to reiterate that it's really important that if a student asks for feedback, that you always give them feedback. I know I haven't been teaching for very long, but to me that's just common sense. You give everybody a correction. Everyone deserves to have feedback, and everyone deserves an opportunity to, have time with me to be able to help them with whatever they need. Me speaking from a teacher standpoint. What other indicators? Now, when it comes to favoritism, the way that I evaluate favoritism, and I'm gonna say it again, that this is just strictly based on observation and not on research. I did some research, but it's not enough to, it is enough, but I am thinking critically about this, guys. So, but another thing to consider is how your teacher defines hard work. And even if you are a dance teacher, how do you define hard work? Do you view hard work as something to, do you just view it as, as long as you're here and paying attention, that's fine? Or do you look at hard work as, what's another way to look at hard work? Hard work being, pushing yourself to the limit or even past the limit, potentially to the point of injury. That's another one that teachers have. Or sometimes the way that a teacher defines hard work is strictly based on biases and stereotyping. So I know someone who they don't say this outright, but ultimately the people that they claim are working the quote-unquote hardest, she naturally pulls out the people who are tall and skinny and have all the right proportions. And now, fat and skinny is also like loosely defined, right? But you know what I'm talking about. They have the body for, they have the stereotypical dancer body that they were given, and not something that they can control. And because they were also working themselves way beyond their limit, the way that this person perceived them as they were the only people that were working hard and everybody else was lazy. By the way, that's not okay. That's not okay at all. It's all about perception, and sometimes the way that a person can perceive you is just completely wrong and and just not what is actually accurate. And so that was very much the case in that situation where personally I kind of had to evaluate, like, am I actually like working hard or am I being lazy? But the reality of that specific situation was that I was working really hard. It's just that I wasn't being acknowledged because of things that I couldn't control. So this is just an example of saying, sometimes when it comes to favoritism like that, you can't really do much about it. And you kind of have to be at peace with that. And if you can, find somewhere else to go that will actually treat you with decency and respect. And the only reason I have that kind of self-confidence is because I found places where I feel like I'm being treated decently. So that's just another example of that. So talking specifically about like biases. So favoritism initially comes from bias. So what that can often look like is if a dancer is just extraordinarily good, or if they're just quote unquote perfect at everything. That can happen. That happened on a famous TV show I won't mention out loud. Another thing that can happen, and this is why I throw biases into it. Another example is if you remind a person of themselves. I find that often happens a lot, where if you find someone who, if you have a student or a teacher, etc., who is very similar to you in the way of, if you're like, sometimes teachers who have a lot in common with students will better connect with them because of the things they have in common. Like, for example, if you are the same race as your teacher, especially if you come from like a marginalized community. I can't speak on that any further. But also sexuality and really anything, whether it would be dancing in a very similar way to how you dance. So that can be a huge indicator. If you find a student that resonates to you, it's very easy to gravitate towards that student, and then it can just cause a lot of, it can start the favoritism, and we don't want that. We want to acknowledge everybody in the classroom. So yay, there's that. So that's kind of where theoretically I believe that the favoritism comes from. And, to me, the big thing that matters, if you do realize you play favorites and you want to reform from that, first off, playing favorites is really easy, and you're allowed to have favorites. as long as it doesn't affect everybody else in the class. That's my thing, right? Because I understand if there's a special connection between, like, a teacher and a student. Like, I'll stay out of that. Special as in there's definitely, like, a connection. You know how some students are closer with teachers. Not in an inappropriate way, by the way. That's not what I'm talking about. But you know, in that event that happens, as long as it doesn't affect the education of the other students in that environment or professionals in general. So that's like another thing. And really, all that you have to do to fix it is acknowledge and realize that you're doing it. Because the people who play favorites the worst don't even know that they're playing favorites. I'm just going to be upfront with that. Like, the teacher who I'm talking about says that she doesn't play favorites and said she focuses on hard work. But then we go back to how does this person perceive hard work? Well, the way that she could perceive hard work is, you know, sometimes it can be based on appearance, etc., etc. Or it can be based on, you know, pushing yourself to the limit, and disregarding any sort of issues that are going on in your body, like chronic illnesses or disabilities, physical and mental. So that's also something to keep in mind. So that being said, I've touched on about how teachers play favorites a lot, and kind of seen that from the student perspective. But there are also times nowadays where teachers are being fair and students are claiming that they play favorites, even though the teacher is trying their best to be fair. So that is a situation I do not know very well, because as someone who was a student more than a teacher, I'm very quick. It can be very quick to make a claim that somebody is playing favorites. It's like really easy to actually make that accusation. And most of the time they're doing it. But there are instances where, you know, and this is why I kind of explain the signs, you know. If you think a teacher is playing favorites, the first thing you should do is self-reflect, honestly, and kind of think, like, you know, am I doing anything that could steer this teacher away from me? Like, for example, like a big example is someone who isn't taking it seriously, or what else? Or you think you're working hard, but you're really not working hard, and you're really just, you know, not pushing yourself the way that you need to. And let me reiterate that there's a difference between pushing yourself and pushing yourself to the point of injury. Let's put it there. And oftentimes, you know, if like a great indicator of, you know, if a teacher is not playing favorites is if you go up to them and you ask for feedback, and they give you some really good feedback to work on in order to, you know, get up to a certain point. You can usually tell if a student, you can usually tell if a teacher is like open and willing to help you. If, you know, they are willing to help you. That's the thing. That's a really important factor. So if you, like, and really that, for me, that's like, they still could be playing favorites, if they like feature a student too much or something like that. But I'm not gonna lie, I'm not a professional. I can't fully look at a situation and say a teacher's playing favorites or they're not. It's just kind of something it takes time to investigate and dig into a little more. But some of the people who do play favorites can be really obvious and really easy to tell that the favoritism is going on. So now this is going to kind of pull into, you know, the dance environment in general, and what can happen if there's an obvious favorite for seemingly no reason, or there is a reason but it's just so bad that it can cause problems. So this actually has happened before, where there was a favorite, a very obvious favorite, and actually there were multiple favorites, but they became alienated from everybody else because they were the favorites. Now, this can be caused by a few things. I don't know what was going on behind the scenes in that. I was not a favorite in that in that. If anything, I was at the very bottom of the totem pole, or whatever you want to call it. But what ended up happening was that all the other students eventually started to resent the students that were favored. Like, they started to not like them, and started, getting frustrated when those students, they were able to get away with a lot more than other students were. So, favoritism can cause alienation from the environment, especially if other students are being completely disregarded for those students. It can cause a hatred, and it can cause the favorites to be, entitled and mean, and especially because they probably don't even notice that they're being favored. And yeah, so that's another thing. That's another thing to really look at, is that how favoritism can affect the environment of the class that you're in. So it can be really difficult to work with a favorite, or it can be really easy. Like I said, I'm talking in circles, but I'm going to be completely honest here and say that this is not a black and white. Like, favoritism is not black and white. Bias is not black and white. Basically, nothing is black and white. There's a nuance and a complexity to everything. So that's just kind of what I experienced with favorites. I know that when I was a kid, when people were favored, it would make me mad and I would want to stay away from them, until I realized maybe they weren't that bad. But that's besides the point. And I don't think that's an uncommon thing. Don't worry, I've grown out of that now. But going back into the environment thing, we talk about this a lot, but even when you're adults, the people that ultimately make the environment are like teachers and the faculty and the professors and whichever educational environment that you're in. We keep forgetting, we're told that, sometimes it is the dancer's job to create that positive environment, but we really have to look to our leaders and follow by example to what they're saying and to what their behaviors are. And sometimes behavior speaks louder than words. What's the saying? Action speaks louder than words. So there's that too. But that's another thing that I'm not hearing much of that often, is that, we hear so much, as students in an environment, you have to be, nice to each other, you have to be kind, etc. But, even in the adult world, adults still act like children. And so it's really the adult in the room's job, like the leaders, the directors, it's really their job to make sure that everything is kind of, under control in that sense. So yeah, what else? That's another thing too, is that I can tell, and the reason why I say, a huge emphasis on the importance of the adults, picking up on things, and, or the leaders of the environment picking things up and following through with it, is that I have been in different environments. The studio I grew up in was extremely positive, and they nipped things in the bud, and they just, made things really, they nipped things in the bud, and that's what made the environment good and positive, is that they really, were in tune with what was going on. Now, the negative environment that I was in was not like that. What we were told was that they're adults, and, they didn't do anything about that. So that's really the big difference here, is that if the students are creating the bad environment, it's ultimately going to be put on the entire studio or the entire faculty or the entire program that this is a bad environment, because it is leadership's job to do something about it. Whether it would be, dropping a grade, or artistic probation, or, or anything in that nature. It's the leader's job to really be fixing that. It's not on the students at all. Although it is on the students to, behave themselves. But the adults in the room have to make sure that is enforced for the people who are unable to enforce those rules. So I hope you know where I'm getting at when I mention that. And, that's why that really is the cause of a negative environment. And allowing behaviors, unwanted behaviors to happen, whether it would be through the dancers. I know I'm emphasizing dancers, but the faculty and the teachers can also really contribute to making it a oppressive. I think that's right. I'm Googling it. Yep. That's what I meant. The leaders in the space can make an oppressive environment, and that's oppression basically. And doing stuff like that, like, it can make it, like, if a teacher is too specific on, everything I previously mentioned, like, if they're very particular, if for example, they don't let you, speak up for yourself or anything, that's like an oppressive environment, I think. If I'm wording that correctly, I don't know. I just was trying to throw that word in there because I know it made sense in that. But that's the thing, like, even in the professional world, I don't dance professionally, but I'm gonna try and get someone who, I'm gonna attempt to get someone onto my show to talk more about that. But yeah, anyways, that's not the point. That is not the point. But anyways, what I'm trying to say here is that, what I'm trying to say in a million different words is that it's the leaders who make the environment and who can stop things from happening. And if they choose not to stop it and not do anything about it, then that's on them. like in schools with bullying and such. Now, we're also going to dive into jealousy. I technically should have done that first, but I didn't. So, jealousy is fairly obvious. Jealousy happens a lot in dance. It's very common, especially when you are competitive, which most oftentimes than not, dance is extremely competitive. And it also happens a lot when students are favored, and oftentimes the favoritism isn't detected, or it is detected and you don't know why the student is being favored. So jealousy, I want to say that, what really frustrates me about jealousy is that it's not normalized, or it's normalized to be an emotion that you shouldn't feel. You should feel happy for everybody who gets an opportunity, blah, blah, blah. I get that, whatever. But and I talk about this, there's a collaboration coming up that I'm doing with an amazing person where we do touch on this a little bit on her show. I believe hers is going to come out October 28th. So keep an eye out, people. Keep an eye out. And it's going to be on her show, not mine. It's called the Prolific Hub podcast, I think. I don't have it in front of me. But we talk about this where, in jealousy, it's perfectly valid to feel jealous, period. It's perfectly normal to be frustrated that someone else got something that you didn't. And, that should be okay. That, I don't know why people use jealousy as a defense mechanism. I understand if you're being bullied, but if you got something and someone's like, I don't know. Obviously nothing is black and white here. But for example, if you have an influencer, or if a favorite is getting alienated because of, or if a favorite is getting alienated and their defense is you're just jealous, or if they get an opportunity and you didn't, saying you're just jealous is an often used defensive mechanism. Notice how I said defense mechanism. Fun fact, that actually did happen. Someone did say, you're just jealous. Not to me, but to the internet. And that made me really mad and not want to be their friend anymore. Not that we were friends to begin with. Anyways, so that's the thing too, is that it's perfectly, I want to tell the people I don't know who listens to this podcast, but I want to tell the people that being jealous is okay. You are allowed to feel unhappy with the fact that someone got something and you didn't. Jealousy is valid. Now, this is where everything kind of ties into place. This is what matters, is how you handle your jealousy. So, what I like to say is that, if anything, pretend to be happy for them, or at least match the energy in the room. Like, you don't even have to walk up to them and congratulate them. I don't know. It depends on the environment. It really does. Like, that's really what it comes down to. But, it's okay. Like, it's okay to be jealous, and it's okay to pretend to be happy for someone else. Like, once again, like that, like, if that's the boat you want to go on, if that's the boat you want to ride on, that's perfectly fine. Like, I'm not gonna judge for faking it. Like, just be careful with how you display your jealousy, because that's oftentimes what can make an environment positive or negative. Yeah. So that's another thing that's really important to consider too. Jealousy is valid. Faking happiness is also completely valid. Now, what is not valid is someone who's complaining about something, or someone complaining about something that they didn't have the opportunity for, and then the person who got it saying that they're just jealous. To me, first off, you are in that situation. Here's what you're doing by saying that. You're not just saying that somebody is jealous, but you're also invalidating the fact that they're jealous. Because, like I mentioned, jealousy is a perfectly valid emotion to feel when you don't get what you want. Like, it's okay to be jealous and unhappy. Like, just don't be careful with how you show it, So if someone's upset about that and you say, "Oh, you're just jealous," like, to me, that automatically makes that person worse. Now, obviously, it depends on situation, right? It really just depends on, like, the situation that you're in. But I'm specifically talking about in dance, if someone gets a special part and you didn't. Sometimes keeping the peace is the best part of it. And, actions speak louder than words. So, don't give anyone a hard time, for being a favorite and getting their part. I don't know. But like I said, this is all coming from experiences of my own. But the thing is, I also know that every environment is different. So maybe, like, it's different wherever you are. But I'm speaking my opinions based on what I've seen in real life. So maybe you saw something different and you have your own opinion on, how that should be handled. Like, maybe you feel like those people should be humbled. I don't know. I don't entirely know how that works. But yeah, those are just some, those are just some things to, like, really consider. That, if someone says you're just jealous, sometimes it's okay to say, "Yeah, of course I'm jealous. Like, you were unfairly chosen for this opportunity, and everyone else was pretty much, like, left in the dust. Of course I'm jealous. Of course." So, do you understand where I'm coming from with that? How, in a specific situation like that can make the person saying you're just jealous sound incredibly entitled, incredibly defensive, first off, because they feel like they're getting targeted. You know what I mean? So I hope that also makes sense there, why I say that. Now, if this is a bullying situation, that's a little different. Like I said, case by case. It's a case by case basis. But typically that would happen if someone's getting, like, left out of things. And really, this also ties back into, the leaders of that environment. They need to have the right leaders. And when I say leaders, I mean choreographers, teachers, directors, all those people. It's really them who need to fix their crap and fix the environment that's happening and prevent that from happening. So I'm not validating bullies of any kind. I'm specifically targeting people who are snobby about getting a part and being completely unaware of the feelings that other people have who don't. Because this has been something that's been happening where, when students frequently get special parts or they're frequently picked on a lot in a good way, oftentimes they don't see the fact that nobody else is getting the same treatment as them. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Because that's the honest truth here, is that, oftentimes if someone is being favored and people are complaining about, oh, I didn't dance this much or I didn't dance that much, and the favorite is like, well, the favorite is not aware of the other people because they're not, or they're not, they're ignorant to it. Maybe that's a better word. They're ignorant to the fact that they're being put on a higher pedestal than the other people in the room. So that kind of also creates a little bit of tension and some sort of maybe the favorite is confused on, why is everybody mad? At least they're in the dance. Which is also a fair point. So, that's, like I said, this entire episode is extremely based on experience and a little bit of research. It's not, this is not a scientific study that you should be, that should be placed into research projects or, taken too seriously. Of course, I want you to take what I say seriously and know the indicators of, know my personal indicators of favoritism, which, believe it or not, are pretty low. But, yeah, I mean, that's just how I look at things in general. And, it really is up to the leaders. And by leaders, I mean, the directors, the faculty, the staff, the teachers. It's really their job to make sure that a business and a program or a studio is, everyone's behaving the way that they need to. So that way everybody can be, decently happy and, can learn, especially if you're a kid or if you're in college and you're still learning how to work with people you don't necessarily like. It's one of those examples of, you experience all these new emotions and feelings for the first time and you need someone to help you navigate that. And that is the biggest gift that anyone can give, it's the biggest gift that I can receive, is just receiving guidance on navigating new emotions or new feelings. And that's really important. And this is all based on my beliefs and how I feel about things. I've also mentioned with the concept of hard work too. I'm also summarizing because we're reaching the end of the episode. But like I said with, talking about hard work is defined differently by every teacher or staff member or etc., etc. I have a different belief system on what's considered to be hard work versus someone who, thinks that it's okay to push a student to injury, or viewing injuries as a common thing that occurs in dance, or maybe it was that person's upbringing that led them to be so harsh and completely closed off to opening up to the fact that they could be causing a lot of issues. So anyways, that's also an important thing to consider. And if you're a student and you're an underdog and you're not being seen the way you feel like you deserve to be seen, that was me. Even just a few months ago, if you feel like you're and it took me a while to get to this point, but if you're in a really bad environment where the expectations of a teacher is something that you cannot exceed, or they're unable to, their definition of hard work is something that is impossible for you to meet, even after, and I'm talking about your limitations. So, if it's physically impossible for you to get a perfect split due to a disability or due to an injury or any of that, or if you have a mental disability or any of that, if they're unwilling to work with you on that, then that defines who the teacher is. That does not define who you are. That's extremely important. Now, please don't misconstrue my words. Still work hard. Still push yourself to to the best that you possibly can without making things worse, obviously. But that's the thing, right? Hard work is very loosely, working hard is very loosely defined as well. And that's just, in my opinion, it's extremely important that a teacher is able to base hard work based on an individual student's needs. To me, that's how hard work should be defined. But, it also varies from time to time, and that's okay. So if you are the underdog and, you fit the description that I left for you and such, and your teacher isn't treating you well because of it, not only your teacher, but maybe it could also be, your studio, your program, etc. Honestly, what really helped me was that I branched out. A former teacher of mine sent me a message to audition for a student company at another school. And, my experience at that place was entirely different than when I felt like I was pushing way beyond my limit for what I need, essentially. But yeah, that's the thing. So, if that's you, I just want, I'm so sorry that you have to go through that and that you're not being seen in a way that you feel in a way that you deserve to be seen. Definitely, if you have to stay at that in that environment, I know it can be a privilege to move and find a new place to dance. But, do the best you can to really find people that will rally around you. And that ultimately came down to the leadership side of things too. So, my advice to you is, put yourself out there and find people that, and this is easier said than done, but find people who, value your worth, who value who you are, value your dancing. They can see, put yourself in a good, and do your best to find a better environment where you can be happy when you're dancing. Because to me, that's the point. The point is to have fun and to enjoy yourself. So on that note, I'm going to end this episode here. So yeah, thank you all so much for those of you who made it to the end and listened to that full 48-minute ramble, or 47 or 46 or 45, however long the episode is going to be. Thank you for listening to me ramble. Anyways, thank you all for watching. I appreciate you sticking it out with me for these last few minutes, and I will see you on the next one, where we will have another amazing guest on the show, who I believe is a former dance teacher of mine, who I love and is amazing. So anyways, bye.
Thank you for watching this episode of Dissecting Dance, Kicking It with Ren podcast. If you can hear the wonderful background music, those are water bottles. This is your sign that you should relax and drink some water. Anyways, a new episode will be uploaded every other Thursday. Thank you for watching.